Been about a month since GPT-5 came out, and some people love it while others are not as impressed and still frustrated. And I do understand the frustration because if you look at it, as you can see on my screen, it more or less feels and looks the same. But the difference really is in the back end. And like any LLM model, you need to really understand the model to be able to speak to it better. So in this video, I'm going to give you 5 key tips on how to prompt with GPT-5 a little bit better so you can get closer to getting and achieving the results that you want. But before I do so, make sure to subscribe to this channel. My name is Adi. I'm here to help plug you into AI so you can get tips, tricks, and workflows on how to leverage AI at your work or in your personal day-to-day productivity. So let's dive into it. So on my screen, we have ChatGPT open. And the very first tip is precision matters. Now, when it comes to GPT-5, precision is a very crucial thing. The reason why for GPT-5 it's even more important is because when prompting with GPT-5, it now follows instructions almost literally. And it can easily be confused by vague, unclear, contradictory directions. And so this is going to result in a lot of delayed or muddled results, and this is probably where the frustration boils down to. And so if we were to dive into an example, let's say I want to get a summary of a report of some sort. So what someone might typically write is something like this: give a brief summary of the attached report, include all relevant details, and don't leave anything out. And let me just get a report from my Finder. And so if I were to press this, in this case, the word here that you need to take note of is the word a brief summary. So this asks for something that's concise and include all relevant details and don't leave anything out. This asks for completeness. However, GPT-5 will struggle to balance this sense of like brevity as well as depth. You're kind of tricking and playing around with its reasoning capabilities by telling it to be brief, but then also telling it to include all relevant details and don't leave anything out. But let's see how we can take this a little bit further. The way that I would do this prompt differently, and I have another window for this, is I would do something like this. You are a business analyst. And then I give it a task. Provide a summary of the attached reports. What is the scope? Focus only on the executive summary, financial highlights and key risks. What is the length? What is the format? And what are the rules? As well as what are some of the stop conditions? And so here I will then plug the same report in, and then I press enter. And you'll see, based off of my prompt, compared to the initial prompt, it's far more specific and precise in exactly what I want to do. This is where I get specific sections now, because I've asked it, focusing on the executive summary, financial highlights, and key risks. And this you can customize based off of the report itself. You can look at some of the sections. So just to show you, I'll pull this up, the state of AI. If you go into any report, oftentimes you can generally get a feel of what are the different sections here. So in this section, how companies are organizing their Gen AI deployment and so on. So this report doesn't really have it, but oftentimes a lot of the reports do have a table of contents. And so you can pick and choose and customize your prompt based off of this. So the scope only covers specific sections that you want. But the key idea here is the difference between this prompt is that there's a lot more precision that I've given it instead of just something simple like this. So it goes without saying, when it comes to prompting with GPT-5, you need to be precise in what you want to achieve. And one thing you'll notice about the newer prompt is that it also focuses on giving it a specific role. And you can take this even a little bit step further by adding reasoning steps if it is a very complex task, as well as what kind of output format you want. So in this case, I did the format as we use bullet points for each section. So once again, tip number 1 is precision matters. I know sometimes we get a little bit lazy and we just want to quickly write out a prompt, but if you want to get detailed results, you need to give detailed prompts. Okay, with that being said, now we move on to tip number 2, and this is using the right depth of reasoning. So GPT-5 is a lot more powerful because of its reasoning capabilities. And so now you can actually configure and tell it what kind of reasoning level you want it to do. it helps with both the speed and the quality. And so what GPT-5 is really smart at doing compared to previous models is they'll match the model's depth of thinking in regards to the complexity of the task. So you want to give high reasoning effort for very complex analysis, for more deep exploration. And then you want to give medium depth for general tasks or things that are a little bit more creative. And then you want to give minimal or low effort for quick outputs, something that you want as fast and concise. All right, so a typical prompt here might look like analyze this data, and then I upload some sort of, let me just find a data set. I have this little dummy data set for some sales. And I might upload this and somebody might just quickly do analyze this data, and that's about it. But this lacks precision, and it also lacks you indicating the depth of reasoning you want the model to do. Right? So I'll give you the data and cool. Right? Very simple. But let's upload the data again. I would input a prompt something like this: analyze the sales data for the past year. And then I would add this little element here, reasoning effort high. And so this indicates to the GPT-5 model that you actually want it to really think deeply about this data. So these little aspects here are things that you want to find from the data. And of course, you should customize this based off of the actual data itself. But you can see already from the beginning, it's thinking longer for a better answer. And it's because I've indicated the reasoning effort to be high versus the original one. You notice it just kind of gave me a response and that's it. So this time, now GPT-5 is actually taking its time to really think through the data so it can give me a result that is a lot more in-depth. And of course, if you change the reasoning effort to medium, maybe it might take a lot faster. So this might take a little bit of time, but the whole idea for tip number 2 is you can play around with its depth of reasoning. So tip number 3 is using XML tags. Now, XML stands for Extensible Markup Language, which is not really important for you to really know. But the main point of this is adding little tags to your prompts so you can provide more clarity, and it also helps the model to distinguish instructions from the content. Now, think about it. You're speaking to an AI, and ultimately you're speaking to a bunch of code. So if you give it these tags, which it will read as code, it will be able to identify what it needs to do better. And so the best way to use XML tags in GPT-5 is to wrap each different section, whether it be instructions or context or data. So a typical example that someone might write is something like, act as a social media assistant, write LinkedIn copy, make it engaging, and add a CTA. And you might just type this in and you'll get a specific response. From an XML tag standpoint, you would do something like this. So you see here, earlier in example number 1, I gave roles and tasks in colon. But here with XML tags, what I do is I define the role in the XML tag, like role, and then I close it off, bracket, dash, and then role. And so now the LLM will identify this as the role, it will identify this as the task, and so on and so on. So it's more or less the same as what you would do in a normal prompt, but now you're actually giving it labels to each specific section of the instruction that you're giving. And this will help to feed the model with a much more precise understanding of what you're trying to do. So let's try to plug this in. Okay, so now we move on to tip number 4, which is don't be so firm with GPT-5. Now, this might sound like a joke. As I said at the start of the video, GPT-5 is a lot more sensitive in regards to the language you use. So even if you get frustrated, you don't want to be too firm with caps locks to indicate a specific point. So just to share you an example, what someone might typically do when they're writing is put something like this: be thorough when gathering information about consumer marketing tactics. Let's say this is the thing that we're trying to look for, and then make sure you have the full picture before replying, include every detail and cross-check all facts. Now, this seems relatively innocent, but the idea is sometimes when people get frustrated, but they put things in capital letters just to really hone in on that point to GPT or any LLM. And while this might make sense in previous models, with GPT-5, the model might become excessively cautious and it may run lots of tool calls in the background. So you need to be careful with this because, once again, GPT-5 is a bit sensitive, so you don't want to be too firm with it. Otherwise, it'll end up taking forever to actually give you a result. And so you see here, thinking longer for a better answer. So in another example, while we wait for that, the actual example I would do is something like this. No firmness, just getting straight to the point. You're a research analyst, provide an overview of effective consumer tactics, focus on 4 to 5 key strategies commonly used in modern campaigns, give brief descriptions, etc., etc. So you see here, this one, I'm not really trying to force feed GPT-5. I'm just giving it very straightforward prompts to guide it moving forward, right? So that's what you need to do with GPT-5. And so you see here, immediately it already started to produce the results, while earlier with the initial prompt, it's including compliance and privacy frameworks. So this is what I mentioned earlier. When you start to be too firm with it and try to force it by emphasizing thoroughness, it will start using up some back-end tools that is unnecessary. So in this case, I just wanted a quick response without being too firm. Now we move on to tip number 5. Now, once you learn how to speak to GPT-5, what can be really beneficial for your results is giving it room to self-reflect. And this is particularly useful, not necessarily for smaller tasks, but for outputs where you're going from 0 to 1 problems. This can be anything from like designing a new web app or thinking of some complex product idea or some deeper creative tasks. So a typical example, initial example might be something like this. Design a web app to help social media marketers grow on LinkedIn. And once again, be thorough, but let's just say we take this out because we don't want to be firm. And then we say, make sure it's the best possible solution. And so the problem with this is that it actually lacks any structure for actually reflecting on its answer. It's just going to overanalyze to give you a result. And this word here, make sure it's the best possible solution, is definitely firm. And this is why it's overthinking and overanalyzing. Now, there's no problem with overanalyzing if you wanted to do so. But once again, the idea for self-reflection is for it to actually think over what its actual task at hand instead of calling the back-end tools. Right, so for an example of a self-reflection task, what I did was I pasted this prompt here where I added the XML tag of indicating that this section here is going to be based, I want the GPT-5 model to self-reflect on its response. And then I gave the given task here. And so you see, now it's starting to give a response. It only took 1 minute. The earlier one took 1 minute and 21 seconds. This one took 1 minute and 4 seconds. And yet the details and the way that it's actually giving the response is a lot cleaner because of the self-reflection tags that I gave it. It's done a better job in giving what I want. Okay, so now while I do understand that is 5 tips right there, I'll give an extra tip, which I call controlling your agent's autonomy. GPT-5 is supposed to have more agentic-like behavior. So by default, GPT will almost lean on thoroughness. But what you can do is you can actually tailor this behavior by using these instructions so that you adjust its approach by setting its limits and telling it whether or not it should act independently or whether it should specify to actually double check with me and so on. Okay, so I brought up an earlier prompt that I shared, and what I'll do for controlling the agent's autonomy is I'll add this little XML tag with agent_control, and I have a bunch of parameters. And so what I wanted to do is I will only wanted to call, in relation to this task, I only wanted to call 3 background tools that it's going to be pulling from. I don't want it to seek clarification from me, as well as I wanted to decide and document its own assumptions. And I want it to be concise and focus only on the primary context that I've given it, right? So avoid any unnecessary extra research. And so this extra prompt that I attached to my initial instructions is going to tell the agent to follow all of these parameters. We're treating GPT-5 like its own independent, autonomous agent. And by doing so, it will start to give me a result based off of those specific parameters. Sometimes with GPT, you can get a result where it asks you questions for more, and that can be really annoying. I just want it to do its job. And so now you need to think about GPT-5 as being more autonomous because it has deeper thinking and reasoning. And so giving it these parameters beforehand so that it can actually act autonomously. So just to kind of recap here, the very first one was being precise. The second was adjusting your depth of reasoning with the GPT-5. The third was using XML tags to be able to specify and speak to the AI much clearly. The fourth was lightening up on firmness, so try not to be so firm with it. Number 5 was then letting it self-reflect. And then the bonus tip was controlling the agent to be more autonomous. And this will ultimately help with faster results as well. Now, I'm not saying that GPT-5 is perfect, but one thing I can't deny that is with these 6 tips, you can definitely get smarter results and safer results. And that's ultimately what matters when it comes to using GPT-5. I do hope that helped. I have made other videos and even longer masterclass videos on this channel related to prompt engineering or understanding ChatGPT or prompting for ChatGPT. So make sure to check those videos out after this video ends. And once again, if you enjoyed this, make sure to give this video a like, leave your comments down below, and subscribe to the channel if you want to continue getting more tips and tricks on using AI to its fullest.